We're never short on chaos, are we? Tonight, I have a few stories that'll make you wonder if the world's lost its mind, or if you have, but it's not you, alright? Tonight, we're going to talk about the Canadian election and Mark Carney, because we might as well find out who he truly is, right? You know, behind the mask. From there, we have the UK's crazy plan to dim the sun, a massive blackout that sent Spain and Portugal into darkness, and a scandal at the World Economic Forum. However, let's start here. I saw this post from Restitutor. The United States has officially pulled out of Agenda 2030. The statement reaffirms that the US voted for America First policies, framing the pursuit of this agenda as their moral and civic duty, and I couldn't agree more. And I quote, "Put simply, globalist endeavors like Agenda 2030 and the SDGs lost at the ballot box. Therefore, the United States rejects and denounces the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and will no longer reaffirm it as a matter of course." So, that's great. Now, there's something really interesting at the end. They go on to say that the US believes Agenda 2030 and the SDGs advance a program of soft global governance that is inconsistent with US sovereignty, which of course is true. That's the entire point, you know? The statement also calls out China for manipulating global perceptions through the UN. Just one example they gave, but the UN's Dialogue Among Civilizations concept is tied to Xi Jinping's Global Civilization Initiative. And really, it's just a sneaky way to protect Beijing from criticism by redefining words like democracy, human rights, and justice to fit China's narrative. You know, communists have always had a twisted love affair with redefining words. It's their go-to play. And to be honest, it reminds me of how the Democrats operate right here in the United States. You know exactly what I'm talking about. They'll throw around lofty terms like protect democracy, but when you peel back the curtain, it's just authoritarianism dressed in a manipulation. And it's almost always the inverse of what they actually mean. When they scream fascism, ironically, what they really mean is limiting the power of the federal government. Yeah, you know, when it comes to politics, words don't mean anything. They're just props, tools to manipulate the masses. You know, it's Orwell, basically. But in this case, justice becomes oppression, freedom turns into control, and equity just means punishing anyone who doesn't bow to their agenda. It's not just redefining language, though. They're weaponizing it to reshape reality itself, rewriting the rules to keep themselves on top. We see it all the time. But anyway, back to Agenda 2030. So, yeah, just like that, the US breaks free, stepping into the role of the control group in this twisted global experiment. It's really going to be quite the spectacle watching who survives the coming years. The United States on our new path, or the rest of the West? Who's blindly marching toward cultural and economic ruin? They're chasing Agenda 2030, net zero, and a surveillance nightmare. Their nations crumbling under the weight of their own delusions. You know, there is plenty to call out Trump on when it comes to technocracy, but at the very least, this pulls us out of the climate agenda stranglehold. Those suffocating control mechanisms that have the West by the throat. Speaking of nations hell-bent on their own destruction, let's turn to Canada. Now, personally, I did not know much about Mark Carney, and I figured that should change. So here's what I found out. Basically, he's the epitome of a soulless globalist technocrat. Surprise, surprise.
My strength is I know how the world works. I know how to get things done. I'm connected. I can deliver for the country. My weakness is, you know, people will charge me as being elitist or a globalist, to use that term, which is, well, that's exactly, it happens to be exactly what we need.
From his past role, including the Bank of England, to his involvement with the World Economic Forum and the Davos Agenda. I'm going to try to cover it all. But yeah, Mark Carney. He's a Canadian economist who climbed the dirty and greasy pole of global finance and politics before emerging as Canada's 24th Prime Minister. Now, before all this, he was kinda unknown to the masses, but he's no outsider. He's actually a polished insider, with a resume that screams establishment, Harvard, Oxford, Goldman Sachs, and central banking royalty. To me, there's a shadow hanging over his ascent. All his ties to the globalist agenda makes you wonder who he's really serving. And it ain't Canadians, that's for sure. What was really striking to me was the fact that most Canadian boomers voted against Trump for some reason, rather than, for their own well-being. Now, some of them would say it's the same thing, Trump is bad for Canada. But I believe that's really just a propaganda talking. Everyone should want their own country to stand on their own 2 feet, be prosperous, fair to their citizens, all that good stuff. And they really rode the coattails of the Trump tariffs right through the election. Legitimate free trade, where both sides end up winning, shouldn't be that controversial. I don't know, I just don't see how anyone disagrees with that. Every nation on Earth should be prioritizing self-reliance. You shouldn't be so tied to the United States or anybody to the point that you can't stand on your own. Now, it's just my opinion, but I think it's going to work out for everybody. Anyway, that's how I see it. Yet somehow they think tanking their relationship with the United States in favor of the EU, Davos, and China is going to be better. Yeah, well, good luck with that. I really do hope they pull out of the Davos debt spiral, but instead they seem to be moving full steam ahead with economic degrowth, carbon taxes, limiting their freedom, and mass surveillance. I don't know, I'm still rooting for you. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of regrets. Canada is in for a heavy dose of authoritarianism real soon. I wonder how often they'll scream Orange Man bad while dealing with rolling blackouts and in between taking bites of their bug burgers. But yeah, I guess we'll find out.
The new Prime Minister is a whole new level of climate zealot and eco-extremist. From his decades-long push for net zero banking that sought to make it impossible for banks to invest in oil and gas, to his promise now to massively increase carbon taxes on our industry, make no mistake, he wants to eviscerate our oil and gas industry. It's right in his book. In Canada, our national identity, unity, our freedom, and our future are at a monumental crossroads.
However, let's keep moving. First and foremost, his early life and education. Alright, let's try to get the full picture. Now, Carney landed a partial scholarship to Harvard, earning a bachelor's in economics in 1988. He went on to Oxford for a master's and doctorate in economics, rubbing elbows with the global elite along the way. His doctoral thesis was something about domestic competition boosting national economies, which is ironic. He really switched up his stance on that one, didn't he? Anyway, after university, he began his career climb, from Goldman Sachs to central banks. Carney spent 13 years at Goldman Sachs, working in London, Tokyo, New York, and Toronto, rising to managing director of investment banking. He was working with post-apartheid South Africa to tap international bond markets and advise Russia during its 1998 financial crisis, moves that scream high finance power plays. Now, I don't know, but really, if we follow liberal logic, doesn't that make him a Russian sympathizer, right? But anyway, by 2008, at just 42, he became the governor of the Bank of Canada, steering the country through the 2008 financial crash. From 2011 to 2018, he chaired the Financial Stability Board, coordinating global financial rules for G20 nations and their economies, cementing his role as a global economic puppet master. In 2013, Carney made history as the first non-British guy to become governor of the Bank of England, handpicked by then-Chancellor George Osborne. Now, after leaving the Bank of England in 2020, he became a full-fledged member of the cult, and I wonder what kind of initiation he had to go through to get that kind of juice. A trip to Bohemian Grove, probably. But after that, Carney pivoted to climate finance, becoming the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action, and advising the UK for COP26, helping design their insane monetizing nature scheme. Great. In 2021, he wrote a book, Building a Better World for All, and it reads like a manifesto of market-driven climate finance, but critics see it as a glossy pitch for his political ambition. Yeah, he basically wrote a book about Build Back Better. But let's find out about his political rise, because it was fast and calculated. Long courted by the Liberals, he advised Justin Trudeau informally during the COVID-19 crisis. So, okay then. He advised Trudeau on his tyrannical COVID policies, huh? That's damning enough right there, don't you think? After that, he was tapped in September 2024 to chair the Liberal Party's Economic Growth Task Force, aka Economic Degrowth, because it's always the inverse of reality with these people. Every time. When Trudeau's government crumbled amid Chrystia Freeland's resignation and the tariff fears, Carney seized the Liberal leadership by edging out the other wannabe tyrant, Chrystia Freeland, his godson's mother, no less. Yeah, a big club, and you ain't in it. So he became Prime Minister without ever holding elected office, a first in Canada, winning a snap election in April by pitching himself as a crisis manager, ready to face Trump's trade war. He got rid of the consumer carbon tax and pushed corporate-focused climate policies, but his quote-unquote pragmatist label kind of feels like a mask for a deeper agenda. It is with 100% certainty that the carbon taxes will be coming back on, an individual level. Alright, I don't know when he's going to pivot, but they're not going to give up on that. It's a key part of their entire funding scheme. Siphon your wealth for doing literally anything in the real world and move that cash directly to the elite. It's the foundation of everything, really. Carbon markets, yeah. And don't forget, in that plan, they allow the rich to offset their carbon with a payment directly to the government, which allows them to keep living their lavish lifestyle. Meanwhile, the poor are going to be relegated to living in, designated zones with no ability to travel. Sound good? Of course not. They're solidifying a two-tiered system. That's what this is. Anyway, as we know, he's quite cozy with the World Economic Forum. We have massive red flags pretty much everywhere. He's been a fixture at Davos, the annual Swiss retreat where global elites plot the world's future behind closed doors. As a member of the World Economic Forum's foundation board, Carney helped shape its entire agenda. Remember that. He helped shape the entire thing, which of course pushes digital currencies, smart cities, and AI-driven governance, systems that just reinforce technocratic control. He's actually spoken on many Davos panels, like the 2018 Global Economic Outlook and others with Bill Gates, promoting essential technologies for net zero, raising eyebrows about whose interests he's really serving. And as I said, it's not Canadians. And the reason I say that is because the Davos agenda, tied to the World Economic Forum Great Reset Initiative, envisions a borderless, tech-driven world where global governance trumps national sovereignty. And you know, Carney's climate advocacy, pushing carbon pricing and voluntary offset markets, well, they fit that mold. Now he's even worked at the Brookfield asset firm, buying up carbon-heavy companies to quote-unquote decarbonize. And it's basically just, I don't know, I've seen people call it greenwashing. They just greenwash profit chasing, and that's exactly what's happening.
We're going to manage to net zero by 2050. Actually, we're going to have specific targets by 2025 and 2030, so you can measure the short term. They don't say this quite as loudly, but what they're also saying and thinking, and we're going to make a lot of money off of this because actually this is the way the world's headed. I mean, I'm not sure exactly when we get there, but
it's not really about the environment, it's more about the money. Anyway, his cozy World Economic Forum ties and Davos appearances fuel distrust, and they should. All he's done is push this globalist agenda. Every chance he gets, he uses underhanded methods to gain control over you, the Canadian citizen, and he's not stopping. Just as an example, he's continuing Justin Trudeau's fight against free speech. Mark Carney's already hinted at incoming speech crackdowns, and they're likely going to mirror the UK's Orwellian playbook. Now they'll probably point the finger at Trump as their excuse, as most of their base have some weird visceral hatred of him. And he's already said this.
Large American online platforms have become seas of racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate in all its forms. And they're being used by criminals to harm our children. My government will act.
So yeah, as you can see, free speech and access to social media is not long for the Canadian world. However, it's not just attacks on free speech that Canadians should be worried about. There's much, much more. Agenda 2030 is the Canadian future.
You demanded action, and now it's time for the financial sector to deliver. To reach net zero, every country, every company, every bank, every investor, every pension fund around the world will need to make some big changes. In the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow, we have an enormous opportunity to bring climate change into the heart of every financial decision. And our plan will manage the risks from climate change while helping to seize the opportunities from a newer, greener economy. The UK has been at the forefront of innovation for centuries, brimming with ingenuity and a can-do spirit. It also houses the world's largest financial system. And by bringing them together, we can deliver the net zero world that you've demanded and that our future generations deserve.
A net zero world that you demanded. Yeah, well, I guess if that's what the Canadians want, that's what they're gonna get. And make sure to enjoy it while you're sitting in a shack with no power. I'm telling you, brace yourself for economic degrowth and net zero, aka rolling blackouts. And speaking of that, let's jump to our other story. Did you happen to catch the massive blackout across Spain, Portugal, and parts of France? There's a lot of theories as to why it happened, but I've read everything from solar flares, cyber attacks, some are even saying a fire in France could have caused it. I've even read something from Portugal suggesting induced atmospheric vibrations. But my best guess is, all signs point to renewable energy as the big culprit. Basically, solar power is intermittent, and a sudden drop in solar output or an imbalance could, in theory, cause frequency deviations, leading to something exactly like this. But that's the best explanation I can give you. I don't know. But the big point is, if any nation wants to do this for real, they have to redo their entire power grid, and no one's done that. So you're going to keep having these problems. But there's one other caveat here. Even if the connection to renewable energy is confirmed behind closed doors, they're never going to admit it. They'll lie strictly because of the implications to their global agenda. This company right here, Red Electrica, had already warned about the risk of renewables, and then the blackout hit them pretty hard. Major cities like Madrid, Barcelona, Seville, Granada, even the Barajas airport, Portugal, and parts of France went dark too. No internet, hospitals went down, payment systems didn't work, and flights got canceled. It reminded me of Klaus Schwab's cyber pandemic.
Pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack.
But here's the timeline for you. April 22nd, Spain's bragging about hitting 100% renewable power. And then a few days later, April 28th, they're hit with the biggest blackout in the country's history. And I quote, "We've officially entered the rolling blackout phase of Agenda 2030. And of course, ironically, it starts in Spain. I say ironically because they've got Agenda 2030 propaganda literally plastered all over. You know, to me, Spain is one of those weird countries that I did not expect to go full-on crazy. They've hit all the woke policy objectives, from climate chaos all the way to gender theory and mass immigration. Anyway, back to the climate chaos, because here's the irony. Spain's prime minister swore that renewables meant they would never have a blackout. Well, shit, that did not age well, did it? Our country's gonna take this as a wake-up call and switch gears? Nope, this is exactly what they're aiming for. Oh, and guess what? With a total blackout, they finally hit their precious goal of net zero. Congratulations, I guess. And at the same time as this, all over the world, the Davos crew is still charging full speed ahead with their plan for net zero and Agenda 2030 obsessions, even if it means destroying the entire planet. Take the UK, for example. They're jumping on board with the Bill Gates plan to dim the sun, and they're kicking it off in the next few weeks. These experiments impact everybody, but did they bother with a vote or any kind of public say? Of course not. Very typical. You know, it's pretty funny, not exactly in a ha-ha type of way, but the UK itself basically gets no sun all year, over 200 days a year with cloud and rain. And yet they're jumping on the chance to dim the sun, and they'll see what happens, I guess. What could go wrong? Well, I say everything. And again, the irony is unreal. You know, the UK spent a lot of money and a lot of time plastering these solar panels all across their countryside, shouting solar's the future of energy. And now they're turning around to dim the sun. Makes total sense if you don't think about it. And really, these people have no clue what's going to happen if they actually go through with this. Take a look at this clip from a Bill Gates funded panel on geoengineering. One guy's worried about causing tens of thousands of deaths per year, but the rest, well, they seem to believe it's just the cost of science.
Can I leap in? This is a really important moral point. So if I made a decision, or if there was a collective decision to do a geoengineering program, and you put, say, the kind of program I think makes more sense to put about 1 million tons a year in, but let's say, you might end up killing many tens of thousands of people a year as a direct result of that decision. I think that has moral consequences. I don't sweep it under the rug. So this is a case where I take this much differently from Alan and think it's a much more serious issue. Now, it's true that as part of doing that, you would hope that the overall benefits of human mortality would be so that you would save many, many more people than that. But the fact that you would save more people than you kill doesn't mean there's no moral impact of making a decision that directly kills people. And I think that we who talk about this have a duty to be clear-eyed about the direct risks involved in doing it.
Yeah, they know the risk, but they don't care. Now, you would think that environmentalists would be losing their minds over this, but no. These brainwashed activists don't actually care about the environment. You know, I can't even wrap my head around thinking that dimming the sun, the literal source of all life, is somehow good for the planet. But like I said, they do not care about the environment. It's all about political power. But really, even that one guy raising the alarm in that video clip, even he's downplaying the real danger. Ecosystems are incredibly delicate, and one wrong move can set off a chain reaction that destabilizes everything in nature. It's a concept called trophic cascade. Now, just as an example, let's talk about Bill Gates and his mosquito experiments. Messing with a species like that could lead to a full-on ecosystem collapse. And the same idea applies to dimming the sun. If these little experiments trigger an ecological disaster, guess what they're going to do? They're going to blame climate change and beg for more money. Obviously, it's become almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. They claim we need these dangerous stunts to save the planet from climate change, and then when plant life starts dying off due to those experiments, they'll point to that as proof of climate change, you know? And now I've also noticed recently, when it comes to geoengineering, there's been a weird spike in stories trying to make it sound normal. Have you been called a conspiracy theorist? Well, you might be owed an apology. You know, there is hope, because people are starting to see through the nonsense. Even RFK Jr. got hit with a question about this, and his answer was pretty interesting.
My name is Emily, and my biggest concern is the stratospheric aerosol injections that are continuously peppered on us every day. Bromium, aluminum, strontium, it's sprayed in our skies all day long. And I know you've talked to Dane Wigington about this. He seems to be one of the experts in the field.
Is there a question?
Yes. How do we stop it?
That is not happening in my agency. You know, we don't do that. It's done, we think, by DARPA. And a lot of it now is coming out of the jet fuel.
Yes,
so,
sir.
you know, those materials are put in jet fuel. I'm going to do everything in my power to stop it. We're bringing on somebody who's going to think only about that, find out who's doing it, and holding them accountable.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I'd say DARPA is definitely involved in some way. They always are, it seems like. For example, though, DARPA openly started looking into geoengineering back in 2009. And there's also some evidence that DARPA's counterpart, ARPA-E, or, related entities, might be funding geoengineering efforts like stratospheric aerosol injection. Now, that kind of research is more prominently associated with academic institutions, like Harvard's Solar Geoengineering Research Program. And they are typically supported by private foundations and billionaires like Bill Gates. And I truly hope they're going to release more info about this stuff to the public. But the fact is, these experiments have been happening for a long, long time. They just lied about it for years. It's also very interesting. If you say chemtrails, you're a conspiracy theorist. If you say stratospheric aerosol injections, then you're a climate scientist. It's the same thing though. Okay, so let's jump back to Mark Carney for a second. Because all of the worst globalist policies are coming to Canada, no question about it. For starters, Mark Carney is trying to limit your ability to travel by plane, jacking up taxes on air travel. And of course, he does this while he's jet-setting around the world on a private jet, of course.
But shouldn't we be flying less now?
We should be taking into account the impact of our flying on the planet now. And that's
pushing up the tax on flying.
You push up the tax on flying, you push up the cost on transport, and that's in part what putting a price on carbon is.
Do you happen to remember this chart about the net zero plan? But just remember that Mark Carney apparently helped create this entire thing. Take a look at this chart. When it comes to commercial flying, they want to zero that out entirely, and they want to do the exact same thing with commercial shipping. So, yeah, think about the implications. If they get their way, you're going to have bigger problems than just tariffs to worry about, alright? Now, on top of all of this, the carbon tax system is basically a cash machine, and every single citizen is the bank that they're robbing. They're going to tax you for literally anything you do. They're going to squeeze your life until it's unbearable, basically turning you into a prisoner, and then they're going to take that money to fuel their tyrannical system even more. But anyway, let's go to a different post from Restitutor. As Jeffrey Sachs has been hitting the headlines quite a bit recently because he can't help himself but advocate for global governance.
And there's one other concept that I find very, very useful. And it's actually embodied in the European idea. It came from the Catholic Church originally, but it's called subsidiarity. And the idea of subsidiarity is, let's get real. We need governments at all levels. We need a global government, that's the UN. We need a regional government, that's the European Union. We need a national government, that is the government of Cyprus. We need a local government, that is the Nicosia City Hall where we are right now. You have governments at all levels.
And just by the way, never trust this guy, ever. So yeah, Jeffrey Sachs is openly advocating for a global governance system, essentially to end sovereignty, and the cost to you is more than they let on.
What's my point? We have 193 governments. They want to do certain things. They really want to do them. But we're not getting the job done adequately. We need the James Madison of our time right now to say, hey, come on, ladies and gentlemen, There's a way to be effective. Here are the steps we need. Here's how we could get together. And if you give up a little of your sovereignty, quote unquote, it empowers you. It doesn't weaken you. It makes you better. It makes you more effective as national governments. This is the idea that needs to be inculcated. It's really important right now. I would like a global tax on CO2 emissions, by the way. I'd like a global tax on international financial transactions. I'd like a global tax on aviation. I'd like a global tax on international shipping. One principle of taxation is tax something that isn't being taxed at the national level. Shipping, for example, is basically untaxed. You have the world trade carried on oceanic vessels, but they're not taxed. International aviation, essentially the same way. International financial transactions, which are trillions of dollars a day, are not taxed. So there's a base there. And if we had that financing, believe me, you'd have the solar panels, you'd have the wind turbines, you'd have the water supplies in today's conflict areas, you would have the transport systems, you'd have the hydrogen economy. We'd actually be making this transformation successful.
The chaos we see in the world, in one way or another, is often tied to this global vision. Basically, to set up this new power structure, they have to destabilize entire nations in quick succession. Take immigration, for example. Their NGOs have funded migrant caravans in Central America, backed pro-refugee protests in Europe, and pushed for sanctuary cities in the United States. And at the same time, governments and media have amplified narratives that paint borders as immoral, sovereignty as selfish, and national identity as oppressive. It doesn't really matter what nation we're talking about either. It happened all over the West. The cascading societal failures that these policies cause just push the world closer to their desired outcome. But the crisis doesn't even matter. It could be climate change, pandemics, or threats of economic ruin. But the message is always the same. Politicians say these problems require global solutions, solutions that can only be implemented by a centralized authority that transcends national borders. It's their mantra. They want a world where national governments are reduced to administrative units, rubber stamping the edicts of a global authority. Simple as that. And you won't even be in the equation. You'll be locked away in your 15-minute city, unable to travel, unable to afford luxuries, or even the food that you like. All restricted due to the carbon taxes and carbon limits. Another ironic part of this is, irony is becoming a theme tonight. Anyway, this was pointed out to me by Tim Hinchliffe, the first time I've heard this, and I quote, "According to a published report, the 1.5 degrees Celsius target was never based on any scientific calculation. It was first proposed during international climate negotiations as a moral statement, a rebuke of the idea that the world could accept some disruption and suffering in order to burn fossil fuels just a little bit longer. So they're basing their entire narrative on a moral statement and then simultaneously using that as proof of quote-unquote settled science. I mean, I knew it was bullshit, but damn, that takes it to a whole new level." Alright, one more story for you. Klaus Schwab stepped down, and I haven't had time to look into this aspect yet, but I have some real deja vu happening. I made a video about this exact announcement a while back, like last year I think. And at the time, this guy, Borje Brendi, took over the role. Anyway, regardless, we have a new twist. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, resigned as chair of its board of trustees after allegations of financial and ethical misconduct came to light. This all came out due to a whistleblower. They claim that Schwab was using the World Economic Forum and their funds for personal stuff like private massages, tweaking research to cozy up to certain governments, China, no doubt. His wife Hildy got dragged into it too, accused of using World Economic Forum resources for luxury travel and treating their property like her personal playground. The World Economic Forum board kicked off an independent investigation into all of this, but Schwab and his family are pushing back, calling it character assassination. And yeah, of course they say that, right? Now, a quick side note, because this ties directly into who the World Economic Forum picked to replace Klaus Schwab. Let's talk about Britain, where they claim their clean drinking water might run dry in just 10 years. Now, this happened because of zero investment in water infrastructure, selling off reservoirs, skyrocketing bills, and water companies drowning in debt. Yet somehow, they still got cash for fat dividends and executive bonuses, because of course, that's their priority, right? Happens all the time. Now, here's one wild coincidence. Right as the UK starts sounding the alarm about their drinking water crisis, the World Economic Forum appoints this guy, the former Nestle CEO, as interim chair. And this guy infamously said, humans have no right to access free water.
Well, we are using in the United States about 400 liters per day. So this 380 liters of water, I don't think this is human right, and this should have a price. Why? Because if we do not put a price, we will not make the investments which are necessary in order to use the most precious of the resources that we have in a more responsible manner. Hello, I'm Peter Brabeck, the chairman of Nestle. There are apparently some misconceptions about my ideas on water. Let me make it clear from the beginning. I have always supported the human right to water. Everyone should have enough clean, safe water to meet their fundamental daily needs. About 50 to 100 liters per day. But not to fill a pool or wash a car. There is a difference. We must transform the way we think about water. By 2025, 1.8 billion people will be living in regions without enough water. Water scarcity is the greatest challenge we face today. And we need to start recognizing water as a precious resource.
So yeah, Klaus Schwab wants you to eat the bugs, and this cyborg demon man wants you to know that you don't have a right to access water. Great. But I have one question. Where do they find these guys? From one Bond villain to another Bond villain. However, before I go, let me just remind you, this is what I believe is going to be their next big play for Agenda 2030. Check out this clip from the World Economic Forum. They say climate change is kind of abstract and not many people get it, but everyone understands how important water is. And then they flat out admit that they can use it to manipulate kids into joining their climate cult too.
Only as healthy as our neighbor is on our street, in our city, in our region, in our nation, and globally. Did we solve that? Like, did we actually manage to vaccinate everyone in the world? No. So highlighting water as a global commons and what it means to work together and see it both out of that kind of global commons perspective, but also the self-interest perspective, because it does have that parallel. It's not only important, but it's also important because we haven't managed to solve those problems which had similar attributes. And water is something that people understand. You know, climate change is a bit abstract. Some people understand it really well. Some understand it a bit. Some just don't understand it. Water, every kid knows how important it is to have water. When you're playing football and you're thirsty, you need water. So there's also something about really getting citizen engagement around this and really, in some ways, experimenting with this notion of the common good. Can we actually deliver this time in ways that we have failed miserably other times? And hopefully we won't keep failing on the other things, but anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. It kind of sounds like they're planning to weaponize a water crisis to force people into obedience. All right, that's all I have for you. But just remember, as these people move forward with their crazy plans of dimming the sun, taxing your every move, and coming for your water, well, you might be asking yourself, what's next? I don't know, but the air does feel kinda heavy. But there's one thing for sure, they're gonna keep pushing and keep manipulating until the world they envision is all that's left. But we can see cracks in their grand design, giant holes really. People are waking up, seeing through the lies and tuning out the talking heads. We're very close to getting out of this. But on an individual level, just make sure that you are the one thing they cannot control. Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the video, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals, or you can use PayPal. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.